Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee is a non-fiction book written by Dee Brown in 1970. It is probably one of the most eye-opening books I've ever read, as it basically tells the story of how modern society triumphed over older, traditional ways of living. It is also a heartbreaking read if you are someone who values the human spirit over economic efficiency. Exploration of North America began in the 17th and 18th centuries, but really ramped up to another level in the 19th century. By the end of this century, native Indian society had been largely eradicated. This is the time period that this book mostly concerns itself with. Dee Brown's account of this infamous and hugely influential time is an extraordinarily detailed one, and it chronicles one battle after another, one negotiation after another, and ultimately one tragedy and defeat of the native Indians by the new Americans after another. The native Indians were a simple people who crafted all of their possessions by hand, engaged in artistic expression as a part of everyday living, and had a deep and intimate connection with nature. They came up against superior technology such as gunpowder, which meant that despite their best efforts, there was no practical way for them to stop the onslaught from the European settlers. Noble warring eventually gave way to genocide and ethnic cleansing, which is why very few people in North America today are direct descendants of the native Indians. Liberal types who proudly and correctly proclaim America to be a nation of immigrants do so without recognizing that one of history's worst genocides is responsible for this. And the book makes it very clear that it wasn't just people who were killed, but a people. A culture was killed, traditions were killed, a way of life was killed, and what took its place is the capitalism we all know and live in today. Most people have watched Western movies and probably come to the conclusion that the Indians were a savage, warlike people who instigated most of the violent tussles that occurred with white settlers. The truth is very different. Native Indian displacement largely occurred through a process of the US government signing treaties with the Indians which governed ownership of the land, and then, bit by bit, groups of settlers breaking those treaties and taking by force more and more of the land as they moved the new frontier west across America. The US government almost always backed up the actions of the settlers, and oftentimes the Indians were bogged down in bureaucracy and legalese when trying to appeal to the better sense of the new Americans. Usually, the Indians did not want to fight as they knew the odds were stacked against them, but as a last resort, most of the tribes did fight, knowing it was their last stand against a movement that would completely change their lives and the life of the land on which they had lived for so long. There is almost nothing in common between America today and America how it was 250 years ago, when the native Indians roamed the plains, hunting buffaloes and sleeping in simple tepees made of buffalo hide. A society that lived harmoniously with nature was systematically replaced by a society that pillages nature. A society who lived active outdoor lives was replaced by a society that lives largely sedentary and indoor lives. A people who left everything in the hands of the Great Spirit was replaced by a people that worships celebrity and money and politicians. It is hard to read this book and not feel like a terrible regression has taken place, that man himself has devolved and become nothing more than an overgrown infant suckling on the nipples of capitalism, destined to starve if Walmart ever decided to not open up its doors. Unfortunately, almost no young people today are reading books such as this one, or being taught about how Native Americans lived and the values they had, and so all of their old wisdom and the beauty of their ways could very well be lost, and in effect has been lost. A book like this is, in my opinion, extraordinarily important. It is a window into a long forgotten and never discussed time, conveniently omitted from history, lest people know the sins their civilization was built on.